Blackmoor Foundations, History, Maps, and Lore, 1971 to 85 of the early fantasy RPG works of David Arneson, co-creator of Dungeons & Dragons, and an official Blackmoor setting. This is an advanced review copy that I was sent by the author, Griffith Morgan, who you will recall is the creative genius behind one of the best documentaries I've seen in decades. That's called Secrets of Blackmoor is what that's called. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you go watch it. But you don't have to go watch it now and come back to this video, because we're going to talk about what this book is. I'm going to give you a review, and it's a little hard to talk about this book because there are a lot of different ways to read it, and this is a very important contribution to conversations that are going on around the tabletop role-playing game hobby these days. We'll get to that. This is not a murder mystery. This is a review, and I'm not going to save my findings to the end. I think this is worth purchasing for anyone who has any interest in the history of the hobby of tabletop role-playing games and or war games. I'm not going to get into the whole debate as to who actually invented RPGs. A case could be made for Tony Bath over on the other side of the pond, Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson. There's a whole conversation that's been going on for 50 years. If you're interested in that conversation, this is a great book to get because it adds additional context. It adds additional data. One thing I do want to mention right out of the gate is that we are living in a wonderful period of history where there's a little bit of a cottage industry where people are going back to the kind of late 60s, early 70s era, and they're really taking a good hard look at the formational years, those foundational infant years of tabletop RPGs. And it's an exciting time to be in the hobby because there's a lot of scholarship being looked at. For a long time, the course of the hobby has been taken as a given. First this, then this, then this, then this, and we haven't really looked very deeply at alternative paths that the hobby might have taken. There are some conversations that have been going on for 50 years, and this is going to provide more ammo for both sides of that conversation. Is Dungeons & Dragons a war game? Is it a role-playing game? How do you properly do it? What's the proper mix? Does it, like so many of the players of the game, lie somewhere on a spectrum? Well, that's all going to be set aside for the moment. But I do think it's important to explain right at the outset that Griffith Morgan is fortunate enough, or perhaps wise enough or clever enough, to have gotten his hands on a treasure trove of the ephemera, the notes that David Arneson took and the material that he produced when he created RPGs in general and Blackmoor in particular. And Griffith, being the generous soul he has, is willing to share some of that ephemera with us. Not only that, but he's taken the time to put it together in a way that makes sense. He doesn't just dump a box on you and say, here, do whatever. He's adding additional context, and just, to be fair warned, he makes a very strong case that Dave Arneson is the man that invented role-playing games, and that he was done dirty by Gygax, and maybe when Gygax got done dirty by old Lorraine Williams, he got what was coming to him, just as Lorraine, when she got done dirty by Wizards of the Coast, deserved what came to her. I'm getting a little off topic here. The main point is that Dave Arneson is the guy that invented RPGs. Now, whether you agree with that or not, there's still a lot of very interesting things going on between the covers of Blackmoor Foundations. And as an advanced review copy, bear in mind there may be some weird oddities, like lots of blank pages that will go away. So don't let like we have a nice glossy cover. It's 8.5 by 11. We get some wonderful art. I believe this art is by Dave Arneson. And as we go through and take a look at some of the things that are in this book, I am going to try to lay out the case for why you should get this, even if you don't care who was the first. Even if you're not too concerned about Blackmoor, this is a part of our shared history, and there's a lot of good stuff in here, and I'm going to be paying Dave Arneson a lot of compliments. So the nice thing is that, as I was saying, Griffith here doesn't just dump the material on us. He adds context, and he basically presents it in a chronologic order. He says, this is the very first thing that Arneson produced. And if we turn here to this first page, we can see that here's a letter explaining what it is. And as we get to, oh, look, here's the first map. And this is where I want to, first of all, let me just explain one thing that I've always gotten wrong. On a more personal note, let me just point out that this book does not answer one of my personal questions that I've always wondered about. I always thought that the egg of Coot was a shot at Gary. See, it's E. Gary Gygax. And when these two gamers met, Arneson was like early 20s. Gary was late 30s. About a 20-year difference between them. So he'd look like a Coot. And I always thought this was. Anyway, could be. Maybe the world doesn't know. Maybe never told anybody. But this is, let me interject here real quick. I forgot to mention this. The book does discuss Dave Arneson's stint at TSR and his feelings on what happened there and why the bad blood formed. But the book is not judgmental in any way, shape, or form. It absolutely views things from Dave Arneson's point of view, but it's taking its information from Dave Arneson's, his notebook, his journal. So it absolutely takes Dave Arneson's view. And it does provide an interesting glimpse into that. And it also talks a little bit about his efforts, Dave Arneson's efforts to create his own competing, I don't know about competing company, but his own company producing RPG. In fact, this map right here, here's a little closer look at what those look like. Oh, hexes are your friend. This is some of the material that was produced for a never published work that provides more detail for Blackmoor. And honestly, I kind of think we're better off that way because this preserves enough of the mystery that if we had God forbid, if we had a Castle Greyhawk style, you remember the Castle Greyhawk, the final official product that was just a bunch of stupid jokes? Ugh. Can you imagine? Instead, we get this wonderful little inspirational book that gives us enough information to decode Blackmoor, but without really getting into the hard and fast details that would ruin your ability to use it as inspiration for your own games. But this is a fascinating map. I gazed at this for a long time because one of the things that this book really highlights for me is that despite their missteps and stumbles as they experimented their way from a pure wargaming society, the book does talk about Castles and Crusade society, towards this new thing. Shout out to David Wesley and his Bronsteins. They got so much right. Boy, that was a really long parenthetical. Let me start that sentence over. Despite whatever missteps they made, these guys, this old guard, right out of the gate, they did so many things exactly right. This style of map is the exact same kind of map that we still see today. You can just make out it was on a graph paper. The blue and this is kind of yellowish through here, was colored in a little bit after the fact to make it a little clearer, that the original Blackmoor was set in the moors. It was a very watery environment. And I'm not going to give you the whole story, but this is actually located in... so what did he get right? Well, we got a little point crawl here with little areas, little locations, little places to explore, mountains, swamps. And why was this so wet and swampy? By the book, the answer's in there. Curiously enough, if we flip back to the little write-up here on the preceding page where Arneson introduces it, this area, here we go. This represents the northern marches which guard the frontier of the great Empire of Geneva. I wonder where he got the name Geneva from. They're already doing call-outs and shout-outs to other gaming groups. Remember, these guys are in the Twin Cities area, and he's doing shout-outs to Lake Geneva. I thought that was pretty cool. But this kind of map, it's basic, it's simple, but it's very evocative, and it does help provide some additional context. This Great Northern Kingdom was Gary's initial attempt at what would later turn into the world of Greyhawk. Flash forward a few years, and we get this reconceptualization of the area. We're still at the Great Kingdom. The Egg of Coot is still up there, but now there's a desert. We've defined a little more definitively of the waterways, and there's Castle. There's the capital right in the center of the wilderness. We've got kind of a more three-dimensional look to the mountains and the elf forest and this little forest down here. And as we turn the page a little further, we zoom in a little bit more on the immediate environs. And not only that, but as we're walking through, so this is a mimeograph map. As we're walking through, so here's our swamp woods and the city of the Red Coven. Keystone, there's Swampwood, the Picts. Gee, I wonder if they read and were familiar with a little bit of Robert E. Howard. Everybody was back in the day. Appendix N is one of the most important things that you can read because it will give you the inspiration. Here's the city of Blackmoor in the vicinity. We've got, this is a freehold over here. But look at that, we've got our church. This it turns out is the graveyard, but here's our castle. And now we have a capital city with some definitive maps. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I did want to show you this map as well. Look at this. The area continues to evolve, and as he is presenting new adventures and new games and campaigns for his friends, doesn't this look familiar? You ever seen a little thing called the Wilderness Survival game? What is that called? I think it's called the Wilderness Survival game, right? This is a reskinning of that board game into something more appropriate for Blackmoor. How about that? We've kind of seen that before, haven't we? So what you see through here is an evolution of Blackmoor as Arneson envisioned it. And in addition to that, this is where the little bits of context come into play, where, outdoor survival. There we go. For a short while, the map from Outdoor Survival is adopted as the campaign area. So we're using this. And the funny thing is that the guys back then didn't get too wrapped around the axle. They didn't get too all busted up about, well, wait a minute, you said it looked like this, but now it looks like this. And look, it's a new game, it's a new board, but it's still all of the same points are there. It's still a point crawl. And this is where we come back to the fact that hexes are beautiful, hexes are wonderful, and it didn't take them 10 years to figure that out. These guys were creating a new style of game, and they, like, immediately at the starter's buzzer, were using the perfect tools for the job, tools that we still use today. My campaign maps look a lot like these. Now, eventually, over time, these will become more professional. And here we see this is the Baron's Tower. This is Svensson's Freehold, and we've got the castle, Blackmoor Castle. This is the Wizard's Wood, and the Wizard's Wood was run by a character. So we're giving additional resources to individual players that they can expand upon, and running Braunsteins. Now, this is where we kind of pull back and we talk about the fact that Blackmoor Foundations is a gift to the hobby, and that there is a renewed interest in these formational years. A lot of the bigger RPG channels, the channels that are dedicated exclusively to RPGs, have finally discovered Braunsteins. The Secrets of Blackmoor is like 5 years old. I don't know why they're just talking about it today. They should have been talking about it 3-4 years ago. But even a lot of the bigger channels that are looking at the history of these games are only looking at things that were and saying, boy, I wish I could do this. I wish I could have been there for this. And one of the lessons that you should take from this book as you look through it is, you are here for this. You should be doing this. The fact that Arneson, that we have 50 years of evolution, doesn't mean that you can't go back to square one and chart a different path. You can't evolve your campaign from a simple hand-drawn coastline, even one as bizarre as this, to discover your own path of gaming. You don't need volume after volume of book. You don't need books. You don't need to watch dozens of unhelpful YouTube channels that give you the same advice that you've heard for 40 years. Go out and explore gaming on your own terms. And don't get too hung up on all of the lore. Remember that it's just a game. Don't get hung up on this modern day conception of, here's a DM screen and I'm behind it and all you chumps are going up against all of my NPCs. This explains in great detail how they went from a Risk-style miniature war game and said, you know what, we're PvP, but sometimes we can work together and we can create this conflict that occurs at the regional level and still have room in our gaming lives to create a little individual group of adventurers who go off to explore up in this area over here. Some of these are great. They have, this is actually a hex map. It uses see the little brick section? This is the same topography, or topology is the word I'm looking for, as a hex map. when you're moving from square to square. It's just wonderful. And there's all kinds of little, so here we get an even more, look at all the detail. Every single tree is drawn. That's just beautiful. I'm not going to do a pure flip through of this, but I will highlight one other thing. And honestly, this part, I haven't read it in detail. I want to wait until I have a little bit more time. The Dungeons of Blackmoor Castle. This is an odd little work of, I call it historical fiction, because it's one part fictional story of a couple of adventurers going on an adventure. I'm sorry, this one is the history of Blackmoor Dungeons, and it shows, look, Blackmoor is 2 words and Moore. Now, some of that might be misspellings. The charming part about having these original documents, or scans, if you will, is that you run into things like, he keeps spelling minstrel, M-I-N-S-T-R-A-L. One extra P, and this isn't a word processor here, so all I can do is do strike through. The early expeditions carried, that stinks. They went down 2 days ago and have not been heard from since. This is an introduction to an adventure that a couple of characters are going to go on. They recruited a bunch of NPCs, shades of AD&D there, and let me pause and add a parenthetical. This is me reading what I want to into this little piece of history. Although Griffith provides us with some context for this document, when it happened, who it was given to, what it was used for in the context of the day, you can go through this and you can learn your own little lessons. You get ammo for your argument, whichever argument you want to make. This is a work of art. And, death of the author, no, Griffith, we're praying for you, buddy. We need another 10 years out of you. You interpret this the way you want to. I'm not going to hammer all of the different ways that this reiterates and lays out how the principles of gaming that I advocate for were used to great effect back in the day, and that much of the last 50 years has been a pursuit of this style of gaming. Okay, maybe I just did. But that's how I interpret this. And the greater point is that you don't have to take it that way. You can take it as, well, they did that for a little while, and then they moved on, and they found something that worked for them better, and I like that style that has not really worked great and has forced me to buy supplement after supplement and listen to all kinds of crazy-eyed Poindexters on YouTube. Anyway, so here we are into the depths of Blackmoor Dungeon and back. Oh, May 25th. Right? Here is our, and this is we're not quite sure what this is. It's a fictional story. It is a Sword and Planet style, what we today think of as, what's the anime word for it? It's just a guy from our day crash lands his spaceship on a science fantasy planet. Isekai? I don't know how you pronounce it, but everybody uses isekai because I guess it's a fine Japanese word, and I speak English, and we regularly beat up other languages and steal our words. So isekai is now an English term that means real world person transported to a magical realm. Now the question is, does this story of this guy crash landing and discovering his world, this new fantasy world, is this a retelling? Is this an actual play? Is this an after action report? Does it have elements of an actual action report? We may never know, but it is fun to read. Now, I'll be honest with you, it's not the best written work of fiction. Dave Arneson, at this point, is writing a first draft straight out of the gate. There's typos. The structure is a little weird, but it's still a great read because it shows you how creative these guys are and how they weren't afraid to get narrative from time to time. And maybe that's the way you want to take this. See, look, we got a narrative here, right? Isn't that great? But I'm also going to point out that one of the things that he was very concerned with was, am I looking at the wrong one here? The yards of reading the passage. Yeah, Ross and Wesley today penetrated into the second level of Blackmoor Dungeons, seeking to carry out the orders of the Wizard of the Wood to survey and map all the levels of the Blackmoor Dungeon. I think I'm looking at the wrong one. Trust me. Oh, there it is. Look at that. There's a spaceman with a blaster. Look at that, shooting at the castle boys. This is the one I should have been talking about, with a little map to show you where the castle is and how the forces moved. And we got some mass combat going there. We've got, where's the part that I wanted to show you here? I'm going to get comments. Oh, why are you always flipping around? We have a nice little supply list. Encumbrance matters. Right, so this is what I was talking about. I was just on the wrong page. This is all the point stands. We have this after action report. Is it a pure work of fiction? Is it a story that he wrote and made copies to hand to his friends so they could get a better handle on Blackmoor and its environs? I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, the world may never know. And then we have this evidence. Another little tidbit here for you. The concept of level 1 of the dungeon is easy, and as you go deeper, things get harder, hadn't been invented yet. Now, we're doing an actual dungeon delve. The book does talk about who was the first to actually do a dungeon delve, and it provides evidence for the fact that it was the creation of Dave Arneson's. Depends on how you define dungeon delve, blah, blah, blah. Same thing. I don't care about that. What I do care about is it's interesting that the original Blackmoor dungeons, you as a first level character, you could go to any one of the, I don't even think levels had been invented by then, but your starting characters, they could go to any one of those levels because there was no, what we think of today, I guess the generally accepted term is, CR, what does that stand for? Challenge rating, right. I never use it, right, because I'm a sandbox kind of guy. Blackmoor was a sandbox. You go in, you take your chances, you take your lumps. You can get the loot and scoot, you're going to be in, it's going to serve you in good stead. So we have, this is really more after action report of those guys, and hiring NPCs and whatnot. And then we have Gertie. I might have to find a way to work Gertie's kids into my own campaign. Gertie is one of the most popular NPCs of the day. She was let me read it. Published in 1972, the events may have occurred months before this. At this point, the forces of the evil Egg of Coot. Okay, so Gary and Dave hadn't had their falling out yet. So that's why another reason I don't necessarily think the Egg of Coot was a shot. It might have been friendly ribbing. Conduct annual attacks on the town of Blackmoor. In the game, players are getting married, and some have built castles. The first person to play a wizard, Pete Gaylord, the wizard of the wood, had a pet dragon named Gertie, and she seems to have hatched some eggs. And that's all detailed in here. And she hatched 5 eggs of various colors. Let me just stroke my chin and wonder if the 5 colors of eggs laid by Gertie had something to do with the creation of chromatic dragons. It would not surprise me one whit. Anyway, that's kind of, then we get some handwritten notes and stuff here. There is so much to this. And of course, Arneson showed the world a whole new way to play the games. This is a wonderful book. I see that this may be the first character sheet, depending on how you count it. You can see that we've got looks, brains, sex, guts, and health. And this is the mother and the father, and then this is the wife and the girls and boys, and for the royal family. And just another little interesting bit of ephemera that I think just adds more context. It's a great book with a lot of really good information. And if you are interested in the history, if you enjoy books like Playing at the World or that elusive shift, it's no longer elusive, right? Like we know war games, this weird thing called the Braunstein, forget the miniatures, let's just do the narrative games. And there are some, right? It's not elusive anymore. Thanks, John Peterson. Thanks Archon. Thanks for all you guys that have written some histories, but now we've got more information. I'm looking forward to seeing more coming out of this trove because there's a wealth of it. But we're operating as a historian. Another little thought. I would say one last thought, but something else will probably occur to me. I mentioned that Griff. We call him Griff. He's got me blocked over on Twitter because Twitter's an argument app, and I like the guy. I really like Griff. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't like him. But it's sometimes there are people you run into, and you just that's not the place to hang out because it's not necessarily built for healthy relationships. Anyway, the point is, I gotta give him credit because even as he is making his case that Dave Arneson invented RPGs and was done dirty, he stops and he says, you know what? A lot of the information in this book is taken from interviews. It's taken from recollections of individuals who were there and who haven't spoken about this for decades, maybe even half a century. We get old, our memory starts to fade. 20 years later, we read an account that may not be accurate and we reform our understanding of what happened based on that account. And now we've incorporated this misunderstanding into our understanding. And when we say what happened, we've been influenced by the wider culture and by these other people. So, some of these notes are hard to place in time. Some of these conversations may not be 100% accurate, but taken as a whole, they all point to his conclusion. So the credit is that even as he makes his case, Griffith says there's a lot of different ways to look at these early days. There's a lot of lessons to take from these, and there's a lot of inspiration to be taken. And so give him credit for that. He also frees you up. For those of you that have a hard time thinking for yourself unless you are given permission, Griff gives you permission to think for yourself, to read this and come to your own conclusions. I'm giving you permission, but first you got to buy it. And I have a link down in the description for where you can buy. I don't make any money off this. This is not like, I don't get paid for these reviews. I just do it because I'm a huge fan of the hobby and I'm a huge fan of this kind of work. And because I think that if you read this with an open mind, it's only going to prove to you that I'm right about everything I say. I may not be right about that part, but there is a lot of wonderful examples to take from here. And if your game has been stale for the last few years, if you're struggling to get past those 6 sessions before your campaign implodes, take a look at what the guys back in 1970 were thinking when they were starting from a blank slate. Maybe your hobby could use that. Just forget everything you think you know. Start over from first principles. Start to reinvent all of these wheels and see if your game doesn't take off in some surprising directions. Who knows? Maybe one of the people reading this book will be inspired to create a whole new way to play games. Let's hope, because we all know how ossified the main hobby is, and really this, in the kind of darker corners, the kind of hidden quiet areas, this is where the real scholarship is happening. This is where the interesting things are happening. So give Griff your support. It's a good guy. Like him a lot. Till next time, I'm praying for you.